Today's session really concentrates on the world of ERP and how it's changed. And many organisations are asking themselves what the business of tomorrow looks like. So we're delighted to be joined by Rob Seldrick, who is the head of mid-market enterprise for Endeavour. To introduce Rob, he's a veteran of wholesale distribution and supply chain industries, having started his career with, which was once Australia's largest food producing company, Goodman Fielder. I think a number of people on call will remember Goodman. Rob's delivered modernisation and transformation projects for companies like Qantas, Komatsu, Uncle Toby's, Steggles, Amcor, Darrell Lee, the Florey, quite a few, and they're just a few, but there's been a lot over the years. And he says of himself that he has a passion for working with businesses to ensure they are future fit and ready to exploit leading edge business practices and technology that is still to come. So specifically in relation to ERP, Rob is one of Australia's leading experts. So we're very lucky to have him today and certainly welcome his insights in today's presentation. So thanks for your time today, Rob. Before I maybe just start going into the questions, Rob, I just want to talk a little bit about Endeavour. Endeavour is in the business of transforming customers' businesses into what they can be. They really help organisations to solve the imagined dilemma. And, you know, many senior people in organisations are asking themselves, you know, imagine if my business could scale its business operations while utilising industry-leading business practices, or, you know, imagine establishing rigours across, you know, financial management and business processes while gaining access to insight and business insights. And so there's many other questions that no doubt senior people are asking themselves, but Endeavour really assists and helps organisations to be able to do that and to be able to get their business, you know, future fit and ready for tomorrow. Rob, thanks for your time. I suppose before we get started, given you've got almost 30 years of experience working with business transformation, is there any one thing that stands out to you that you'd like to share? And then we'll just start covering off some of the other topics today, if that's okay.
Yeah, thanks, James. So probably just from the outset, I have enjoyed working with businesses for a long time, but I think importantly, just to put some structure to that, I've worked with large and small businesses. So in the small to medium-sized businesses, one of the things that I think is true from my experience in talking to organisations is businesses that go through a transformation but don't have the right ERP or connected solution underneath it struggle to hold that transformation over time. And the reasons for that is that the transformation obviously is undertaken with individuals and they move on to other jobs or other companies. Workarounds are put in to make that transformation work, but they're not long-term sustainable. So, you know, the one thing that I would say that just stands out for me is that people often start a process without an ERP or a connected system underneath it and often come back later on and put that in maybe 5 years later. So I think get that bit right first gives you a much greater success rate around transforming the business to be whatever that business needs to be in the new world or the next world.
Okay. And so, I mean, back to its basics, maybe just explain to the audience what an ERP is, because there's a lot of misconceptions and, you know, business transformation generally, and there's so many systems, et cetera, that are available. So people probably have a perception of what it may be, but I thought it might be best for you just to be able to touch on it a little more, given your experience.
Well, let me start by saying one thing that it isn't is a big ugly beast that should scare you. It's actually a single solution, ideally, that unifies the people, the processes, and the technology within an organisation. But I think to keep it simple, it's really about covering the broad operational end-to-end processes and doing that. So, by example, you know, organisations that have ERPs might start their prospecting journey in the CRM world, which is embedded inside the ERP, go to a quote process, decide then to turn that quote into a sale, deliver the goods that relate to that quote, maybe they install those goods because it's a service type area, and then they go to billing. So all of that process should be living in one solution, and that's what an ERP delivers for me, is bringing those processes together. Now, there's some value around that. More than anything else, though, when they're connected processes, is you actually have a visibility across the overall end-to-end process rather than the individual silo processes. So an ERP brings that together. As far as the words go, it's enterprise resource planning, although personally that doesn't mean as much as it used to, because it's a lot broader to what organisations used to do.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, what maybe a follow-up to that is, when, should organisations start considering putting in such a solution into their organisation?
Yeah, so I think this is an interesting question, and I liken it to, for many years I knew my eyesight was going, and I sat there and I lived with it, and I brought things closer to my face, and I created my own personal workarounds, and then someday I just turned around and said, I've got to get some glasses. And, the next day I sat there and said, why the hell did it take me so long to get my glasses? That's how I perceive the journey. You and me both, Rob. Oh, me and everybody, I think. ERPs are like that. So, I talk to people that are running, say, Xero, AccountRight, some of those business systems that have served them really well as a younger business in their journey. And what's actually ended up happening is they've created a number of things that have shored up the dam before it burst, if you like, along the way, and become aware that that's standard normal. So for me, those businesses that have gone through that change to a true ERP are often sitting there saying the same as me with my glasses. Why didn't I do this 3-5 years earlier? And so I think, the answer to that question is now is actually a good time to assess whether you're on that journey. If you're sitting there not on an ERP and your business is actually chugging along, absolutely should be looking at it now. Now, the questions you can ask yourself to determine that are, can you see your business at a glance? So are you actually able to step out of the business, look at the insights, dashboards, etc., and have a really good real-time understanding where the business is at? Do the key processes talk to each other? So, for those people who've got maybe Xero as finance, Sin7 doing some inventory, maybe something else doing their CRM side, they're probably not talking to each other. And even if they are, they're whispering rather than actually having detailed information. And further than that, they might actually not see the world the same way. So Sin7 talking to Xero, for example, has a real issue with foreign currency and how the two handle it, and they don't match up. So to me, they're the question. The other thing is the workarounds, the spreadsheets, the manual tasks. If you sit back today and go, gee, I've ended up with a lot of things going on, and Derek is the main guy that knows all this stuff, and I lost Derek tomorrow, how would this stuff work? Then again, I think you're ready to at least evaluate an ERP in the conversation. The other question I actually ask a lot of owners of businesses is, two things. If somebody bought the business tomorrow, would they keep that solution set going? And it's interesting when you ask that question that many owners will go, oh, maybe not. Because that's actually one of the realities to check. The other thing is, if you doubled your business or trebled your business tomorrow, how would your processes handle that? And many businesses, the answer is, I'd probably put on a few more finance people, or probably put on a bit more back office and all that. We don't want to do that. We actually, when you grow, want to leave the back office at the right size and put that investment into lead generation or driving your sales force, etc. So, look, in short, I'm a bit biased. I think, right now is the time that people should be assessing whether an ERP makes sense. And then at least if you come to the other end and go, we're not quite ready for some reason, you've gone through it. Rarely people do, though, get to the other end and go, we're not quite ready. It's a bit of a bell-tolling moment for a lot of people.
I think, and you would no doubt agree, that there's a lot of misconceptions, myths about ERPs, what they are, what they aren't, what they can do, what they can't. Maybe you can talk us through some of those, and also, by implementing an ERP, does it guarantee, that transformation success for an organisation? Could you just touch on that for us, Rob? Yeah.
So just jumping through the question of does it guarantee success, and the answer is no, it doesn't guarantee success. But as I always say, it gives you the best opportunity for your business to thrive. And that's a different turnaround to success. I don't actually see a lot of, the last 5 years particularly, I don't see a lot of people regretting investment in ERP at all. In fact, I can't think of anybody off the top of my head as such. So I think right now it's definitely, there's a level of assurance in going forward. But the stats are pretty clear, and I've got some stats at the end of the slide and to be able to share with you guys. 95% of businesses put in an ERP absolutely claim they've got improvement through putting that ERP in. 49, almost 50% of those actually see improvement across all their key processes. Now, that to me is a pretty good number to be looking for return, because in amongst those are people that are going to be good and bad at doing these things anyway, right? So I don't think it's a guarantee, but certainly I'm very confident that I don't see people get to the other end and not achieve their goals in that sense. So just taking the first myth, James, around ERP being a glorified accounting system. So I think the first thing I would say there is that, you know, a large number of decisions for ERP are based on finance first. So we can't hide from that fact. It's a better, in my experience, a better financial setup than some of the business management tools out there like Xero, or even some of the older ERP solutions. They tend to handle more complexity. So businesses today have different ways to go to market. They have multiple currencies, they have multiple companies and entities that they need to deal with, and actually multiple markets. So they might be, you know, looking to go into the US or New Zealand or wherever else. So so let's take Xero as a good example. So Xero is fine if you want to go to the US, but by the way, you have to have 2 instances of Xero. It's not going to be the same one. But if you've got, and I spoke to a company yesterday with an IP solution they had for farming or agribusiness, if you've got the right solution and you then want to go into Romania or somewhere else, good luck with Xero. You know, this is where you do need to have a solution that's built for bigger, if you like. So for me, it's not just about being a better finance system though. It's about all the other things for that end-to-end process. So sales, projects, inventory, depending on the business you are catered for in the ERP system. So we don't need to cobble on or connect other things to make it work. They're available. And why that's important, and I'll touch on this later on, is when you do an inventory update, for example, where you just pull something out of stock and you consume it against a project, all the financial things happen at the same time. You don't have to worry about working that stuff out later on. You don't have to worry about a manual step. They just happen, and your cost of goods sold obviously is then reflected correctly down the line. And it's the whole business focus. So for me, an ERP, and particularly the last 5 years where ERP, I think, got it right, are very role focused. So they look at a financial controller or a CFO, and they look at the things that should sit on a dashboard, and they automate the things that they're doing on a regular basis. So what it should feel like is a very comfortable world for somebody in that role. So now you go to sales, you go to engineering, wherever it is in your business, the system starts molding itself around what you do because it's much more role-based. Does that make sense, James?
It does, absolutely. Let's talk about myths around integration. Maybe you could just talk us through that. Yep.
Yeah, no problem. So I do get a lot of discussion with best of breed. And I'll maybe just start this conversation with, in my journey, I had I'll call it the joy of working with Lion Nathan, as it was called at the time. It's now called Lion. And it was an organisation that was running my manufacturing software, but they had a different finance software, and they had a different that, and a different this. And they were loving the best of breed challenge. And what they sat back afterwards, though, after many years, and realised was they were pumping millions of dollars into middleware activity to keep things talking to each other. And they weren't doing a good job at that. So it's no surprise that CIO moved on at a point in time. Different philosophy came into play, and they moved to a single ERP concept. Now, they still have some add-on things. It won't surprise you to know that formulation for beer isn't a standard ERP requirement as such, right? But they've moved away from that. And I think, for me, the best of breed is a bit sexed up, and people go, oh, yeah, I've got to have this. And actually what they get in the outcome is the opposite. So I think there's a double myth here because in my experience, they just don't talk well to each other. So there's a myth of I can have the best products and put them together, and there's a myth of you can actually put them together full stop. So what I've seen is that really you're left with four choices if you want to do this right with best of breed. You're looking at systems that don't connect, and you tend to then have it led by the finance system. So people that run Xero, I'll keep using Xero as a bit of an example, will then look at only the things that work with Xero. So they're actually not looking at the best solutions out there. They're looking at the ones where Xero and some partner have decided to build a connection as such. Further to that, you get the other things like you build out your own middleware, as I talked about with Lion. So there's a cost. And you know, for smaller organisations, that's not middleware. That's Johnny running around trying to get data on a spreadsheet and put it into another system. So something that covers risk, is in the data can be inaccurate. It covers cost, etc. And you suffer that manual loading concept to make it all work. And then, you know, look, there is the fourth choice. Some people actually go and build their own systems. I see a lot less of this, but I still have these conversations with people. I don't know why you would do that. ERPs offer experience from thousands of organisations that have gone before you. So unless there's an IP part to the conversation you want to have, then really you should be able to find that stuff together. So look, best of breeds for me, I'm not at all a fan. I want to add to that though that ERPs aren't Jesus Christ. That, you know, that they do a lot of great stuff and excellent return. There are times when you do need to add on a solution that does a specific task or set of tasks. I don't run away from the fact of doing that. So, for an example, labour hire, very few ERP solutions do that well. So, you know, there's some good labour hire things. But again, you connect it through to all the other processes and inform those. So, does that make sense again, James?
Yep, sure does. I want to touch next on the myth around ERPs only being suitable for bigger businesses, but I just remind the audience, and again, there's quite a few with us today, please continue to ask your questions. I can see a few that are coming through, but in the main session, we've got about 12 minutes before we're going to go into questions, and I want to give everyone the opportunity to at least put to you, Rob, some of those questions. As I said, I can see a few and some good ones coming, but please, by all means, feel free to put it into the to the chat below. So let's talk about that myth around big business, because I suppose that, you know, just over that last 30 years that you've been involved with business transformation, I mean, there's so many different systems and solutions that have come into play, and there probably has been a misconception that only big businesses could really implement such technology. But the flexibility of, I guess, cloud and I suppose that a culmination of business learning over many years has enabled other businesses to be involved. Maybe you could talk through some of that, please.
Yeah, absolutely. This was true many years ago, and maybe even not so long ago, if I talk in the sense of 10 years, etc. Only large blue chip organisations could actually afford to do true ERP solutions. And, you know, it made sense for them because they were sitting there investing a lot of effort, maybe over a 2-year span, to build out the way they wanted to do business, etc., and commonise it across maybe multiple divisions, multiple categories, whatever it may be. And they got some payback. You know, and we can argue out, by the way, whether all the payback was delivered to some of those big businesses. Today, it's very, very different. And I guess it's the old, I don't want to call ERP a commodity, but the reality of a product comes out, you know, you get a lot of value for it, and over time, it becomes something that's in the market everywhere and available. So I think right now, in the last 5 years, and I keep seeing this as a critical time, whilst cloud's been around for 10 or so years, I think it's a perfect time that ERPs are for the common man or woman as such. You get the best of what the big companies have got for all of their time. You actually learn from their learnings, if you like, and they're embedded in the solutions, the way they work. So what smaller or mid-sized businesses get is end-to-end processes that really work. And you focus on personalising the parts to your business that matter, not the core way the ERP works. So the projects are a lot smaller, and I'll come to that in a second. The other thing I would say is, I'll turn this around as a myth in a sense. Smaller, medium-sized businesses need to do this stuff now. The expectations a while ago were you're dealing, if you're a large, say, Coles, Myer or how far back am I going? Coles or Woolworths. Those guys didn't impose things on you back then because you were a small business, or you went through some aggregator organisation that did big business stuff for you and you lost margin on that transaction. So now they expect that things are common today. So electronic interchange, so EDI is a requirement now. They expect you to have customer service that allows them to raise a case and a warranty call. They expect you to have the things that are delivered through an ERP now. So I think we're in a perfect world where absolutely not just for big business, and I would suggest that smaller business actually get better returns from it than big business. So if you think about big business, they still want to do it their way. They still see their way of doing things as the way they differentiate themselves. Whereas smaller business and medium businesses understand, look, I just need to get e-commerce working and have that transaction go straight back to my finance side. I need to make sure things flow. Flow is the best way you can make money in a business today. Don't let them be held up. You're going to do that. So I think absolutely this one's a big myth for me. And I think it's changed that maybe if you asked me this question, James, 8 years ago, I might have been a little bit careful about my response. I see it now when I look at who do I want to talk to. I'm happy to talk to businesses that are right down to, say, $10 million, $6 million as such, because I have an answer that I know can work for them, versus a while ago, I needed a larger organisation to actually make this work. Does that make sense again?
Sure does. Thank you. The next one, and I think that this myth or misconception really comes because many years ago it was just so difficult to be able to put this type of technology into organisations, but there has been a perception that it's really expensive, takes a long time to implement. Maybe you could just talk us through some of the changes that have occurred even more recently, particularly with the introduction of cloud. What does that mean for organisations, and how, and is it still a challenge, or are we seeing timelines reducing and the actual budgets required to implement such solutions reducing?
Yeah, look, I'm going to take you back quickly to 1998 when I was working for Goodman Fielder. I was brought in to be a process manager from the field in the corporate office, and I was part of a $150 million plus project to come up with the Goodman Fielder way and implement that ERP solution, which was SAP at the time, across 11 divisions. And it was a fantastic experience. I loved it, but at the end of the day, I look back at it now and go, oh my God, we spent so much money. And I think about we presented to 200 executives in hotel rooms about what we thought the processes should look like. We invested all this time on as is and came up with the to be bit. We kidded ourselves that Uncle Toby's and Bluebird in New Zealand or Meadowlee, we're all going to want to do the same thing, right? Without breaking the business up and go to a category focus. And if you ask me, do we get the return we wanted? I'd like to say yes, but I'm not sure we did. So fast forward to today, it's a whole different world. And I wouldn't, in that large organisation, I wouldn't do it the same way. I certainly wouldn't do as is. Today, it's a much more cost-effective approach. There's, for a start, if I take NetSuite as an example, one of the ERPs I work with, there are best-of-breed built-in processes actually inside the solution. All we need to do is fill in some data and you can turn it on tomorrow, right? Now, it's not actually as simple as that, obviously, but that's the concept. And what I say to everybody is, if you're thinking that the way you process a sales order is part of your IP or your differentiation to the bloke down the road, you're kidding yourself. It's the other stuff around that that's going to differentiate you in customer service, etc. But the technical thing is there. So ERPs today, like NetSuite, come with that pre-built, ready to go. It's also faster because we've got a better. So in that example, there's Suite Success, which sits down and aligns your business to the standard solution. Not let's spend forever coming up with a solution you think you want to have, because honestly, if you've never done it, you're probably going to get some of those questions wrong anyway. So the driver in the projects and the implementation is very much about leveraging what's in the solution, sitting there and accepting the bits that should be standard across businesses, but then focusing on aligning the things that are important to you. So if you've got a particular process that maybe isn't standard, we then personalize that in the system as well. So the end outcome is you're leveraging thousands of other businesses that have gone before you, and you're getting a faster repeat. So we're talking about 3 months to go from start to finish of a project. In some cases, it can be smaller. There's also startup concepts as well now, which means that if you're a startup business and you've got a great IP, maybe you've got a new drone concept that does servicing out in the mine or whatever else, we can just put something in, stamp it in. There's a bit of suck it up the way it works, but when you go into raising up some funds and equity, people look from the outside and go, these guys have got their foundation set, they can grow. And that's one of the things that are important. Does it make sense again, James?
Yep, sure does. About 4 minutes left into the main session, Robin. Before we do, I just wanted to maybe just touch on the other one being that ERPs are hard to learn. We all, I think, as organisations, are sometimes a little afraid of being able to bring new technology into businesses because we feel like we have to scale up a lot of staff, and it's going to be really difficult to be able to learn and get them to be able to understand that technology and be able to then have that delivered across the organisation. Could you just touch on some of the modern type of solutions and how that could be implemented into a business to make that a little less arduous?
Yeah, so let me start by just confirming, look, there is an adjustment, so we just need to be respectful of that. Change can be difficult, and for different people, depending on where they're at in their life, it can also be scary. So I use an analogy about riding a bike when you're a kid and you've got your training wheels on. And, for all of us who can remember back, and I can remember my kids taking the training wheels off on the lawn and all that, that first instantaneous reaction is, oh God, I'm going to die, or I'm going to fall off, or whatever it would be, right? I'm not saying that's the reaction you get from an ERP, by the way, but what the kids soon learn is the training wheels are off, and they can do so many other things that they couldn't do with the training wheels on. As simple as just turn the corner faster, as simple as actually do a wheelie or whatever fun thing they want to do, as simple as doing jumps. So to me, it's the same thing. When you're going from something like Xero, Account Right, even some older ERPs, you're going to sit there in the first couple of weeks, maybe a month and a half, and go, this is different, this is challenging. But what actually happens, you come out the other side and you go, oh my God, I couldn't do this before. Now I can see this, or there's an alert that comes up, it's change that has to be managed and worth it. The other thing that I think's important there is the users today, not always, but most of them, are much more tech savvy than they used to be. So they actually come the opposite way. They come in with expectations of how systems work. So the learning bit is a bit faster, or maybe a lot faster for them. They're also, so again, take NetSuite as an example, has an online learning system. So in an implementation, you do some classroom trainer stuff, but there's actually some pre-work that you do before coming into that online. There's some refresher work that's available to you. There are videos and things like that where the people today that are working in your business, they expect that sort of stuff. So they're craving that learning journey to actually support what goes on. The last part I would say is that the systems themselves are more intuitive to use, and the applications are designed around what end users actually do. So the best example of that is that a number of years ago, I worked for an ERP company, and they had the whole focus around the UI, as they call it. So what it looked like to deal with, and they moved that focus to user experience, which included what it looks like, but more about how it connects to the next thing you're going to do. So when you think about a sales order, what you want it to do is to pop up, what stock's available. You want it to be able to tell you the next logical actions you might do. And there might be 9 of those. So we want to make that a fluid experience for people. So when you come back to learning a new system, if we get that right, and ERPs are much better at that, nowadays, you tend to find people, have a couple of scratches learning it, but then they just start following the ball and it makes sense. So, just to close that out, they're much more intuitive systems that are much easier to learn. There is one thing about this I'll say, though, that's all based on people. Some people take 3 months to learn how to drive a car, and some people take 5 days to learn how to drive a car. interestingly enough, though, the people that are driving the car 2 years later might be at the same level. It's just about the journey for them.
Got it. Okay. I might just get you just cover off some of the other myths, and I mean, there's lots of them. And I'll also just maybe some around statistics. You might cover off these a little bit more quickly, just given the amount of questions that we've got. But maybe could you just touch on some of those, please, Rob?
Well, I'll pick out one. Systems don't do reporting. It's just absolute rubbish. Now, I'm not saying that business intelligence solutions can't take you a step further, etc. But ERPs today have great dashboards. They have great views, ways to present information. They have alerts. So you may not need to report on it. It's going to present you things. I think it's a whole new world than what it used to be many years ago, when you'd buy an ERP and then you go choose a reporting system because report writers are bloody horrible and whatever else. There are so many different ways to digest information within ERP systems that, for many people, you don't have to go and actually look at a BI solution. That there's inbuilt logic to that as well. The last one that I'll just talk to is that, ERPs require my system to employ an IT department. Absolutely not true anymore. And the cloud is the breaker in this. So cloud's been out there in an ERP world for 10 plus years. I'm probably underdoing it by a few years. It's absolutely right now, and it works really well. So what you should expect is that you've got a cloud solution. You don't need an IT person. You just need somebody that can be the administrator. And what that means is set up security for people, a few things like that, and maybe become a super user in that sense. All of the back end stuff is sitting in the cloud and protected. Now, we've obviously seen the recent Optus stuff. So, big companies can have failings as well, but I think that's different when you're talking to Oracle is the back end of NetSuite. We've got Amazon at the back end of a lot of other ERPs, etc. There's a lot of things. So it actually works the other way. It's not that it requires an IT. You actually get IT grunt that you haven't got today as such, assuming you're going down a cloud department. If you're going down on premise, yes, it still requires an IT, and that's something I wouldn't be recommending.
Sure. Before just moving into some of the questions that we've got, maybe you just want to talk us through some of the statistics of ERP, and then we will. I've got a number of questions here, so I'll just ask those if you've got some time available, Rob. Thanks.
Sure. So on the statistics, I just want to share a few with people that could take a screenshot of or whatever else, and talk to me later on if they wanted. But one of the things that I think is really important is return on investment. That companies are seeing that investment being 2.5 years, and look, don't be wrong, I'd like to say it's 1.3 years, and in some cases it is, depending on the problem being solved. But the important bit is that investing in an ERP does see a return, and of course after the 2.5 years, you're starting to work on other things and solving it. So that's important. The second one, and then I'll leave it alone, is that where is ERP going? So the companies, 64% of companies use software as a service. So that's true cloud ERP for me. So that is absolutely the direction. 24 or 21 other % of companies are having an ERP and they're having it hosted in the cloud, which I'm not a massive fan on, by the way, but it's still achieving some of that cloud. But the 64% is the important bit. They're traditionally or mainly the smaller to mid-sized businesses that are committed to it. Now, large have as well. When I was working with Qantas a number of years ago, I couldn't put anything forward with my software unless I could convince them that it had a cloud concept behind it. So it's not just for small businesses, but I think cloud is the only way to go for small businesses or medium businesses today.
Rob, I've got a few questions, if you wouldn't mind, that have been shared by the audience. The first one being, how do you access and find the correct ERP system for my organisation? How would one go about that?
Okay, so I think the normal process that we tend to guide along is there's an initial discovery or business discussion, whatever you want to call it, and that's about getting context about a few things. It used to be very much about what are the pains and let's prove we're going to solve those pains. But it's actually now turned a bit more around. So we still understand pains, but we're focused on what sort of business do you want to be in a year's time or 2 years' time? What's your strategy? Where do you want to be? Because they're not the same as pains. You can solve your pains with the wrong ERP system still. What we're looking at is where does the business want to be? So from a concept of understanding that, we then present back some options around that. So, in our NetSuite example, we would actually have a process where we have a few more deeper dives, present back what our solution would look like from a process point of view, not a demo point of view, and then work through the conversations of where to focus those discussions next. At that time, we're probably starting a discussion around what's the budget look like. There is this is not anywhere near the price that it used to be, but there's still a reality that there's something to fund along the way. And why we do that is that on your side as the business, and we can help with this, it's, you can't determine a return on the investment if you don't know what the value of these changes is going to be. Now, we can assist with that. Sometimes they're very obvious. If you put in a proper inventory system, you might get a 10% saving on turn every year or something like that we can work through and put a number on that. For other ones where you've got manual activity, you might be able to say there's some hours, etc. But some of those also start becoming we probably think we could free somebody up for that amount of time. So there's an accurate way, and then there's the other things that sit around it. So once we've got that, we then go into here is what the design looks like at a high level. And depending on the ERP system, that can either be, here's the standard products, and these are the 3 things that we're going to do different for you. For other ones, we could be, well, this is what you're going to be at the outcome, and this is how we get there, and so on, and you sign up to it. There is a check and balance, though. If you go up front, we're trying to assess a couple of things. So one is the fit of the solutions that we're proposing that meet your outcomes, but also where are you at in your journey? So there's a frankness in that conversation that ERPs are for everybody, but we need you to be switched on to want to do the change and to drive that. I do meet with some organisations. The first thing they say for me, I'm only doing this if it's easy. That's usually a good red flag, right? Because change isn't easy. It doesn't have to be desperately hard, but you've got to be willing to step off that cliff at some point. Does that make sense?
Sure does, Rob and Ursula. I hope that answers that question for you. I think it's a broader question that can potentially be answered here today, but I think, Rob, you've certainly touched on a few of those points. And Ursula, we might reach out to you just to be able to have a further discussion about how that might be able to be discussed for your business specifically. Charmaine asks a question here about suggestions that you have to help decide on a replacement finance system, i.e. from zero to more of a sustainable system without the risk of over-investing. I think Charmaine's mentioning here that she feels that an ERP potentially can be a large upfront investment, although I think some of the myths that we discussed earlier probably addresses some of that. But maybe you could just answer that for us, Rob.
Yeah, sure. So, the first thing I would say is that there is an investment we talked about, but there's different ways to actually consume that investment. So one of the things that cloud offers is expensing out the software side of it into a monthly, quarterly, annual, depending on what suits for you concept. So you get to spread that cost over time. You also get to actually do the same with the consulting, where depending on what the project looks like and what we're trying to achieve, that's not necessarily an upfront cost paid in one concept. It's there. So that's the cost side of the discussion. And I personally think people spend far too long on that side. I genuinely think that if the number is an extra $10,000 or under $10,000, does that really matter in when you get to the outcomes that are going to be delivered? So when you're talking about the value side of the conversation, that's where we'll have it. So if you want to know, are you over investing or not, that can only be determined based on the returns you're expecting to get from it. Again, I'll go back to that number earlier that people definitely saw improvement and return on investment from spending money, moving from, and in this case you've said zero, which is great because zero holds you back. I'm not taking away from zero as a small business when you're growing, but at a point in time for businesses that are ERP ready, it's constraining what you do. So releasing the shackles, you will actually achieve more outcome than that. Now, the other part of that question is we're very conscious of working with organisations to their abilities and what their budgets are. So being upfront and honest, if you're working with us, for example, is a great thing to do, because if you say to me, Rob, this is excellent, but I'm only going to spend 10 grand, I'm going to have a conversation with you about, you probably need more than 10 grand to actually achieve what we need to do. But that should be an open, honest conversation, not a caged, well, I won't tell you what my number is sort of thing. Again, I want to go back to, though, over-investing is an interesting term because that depends on what value you return. So we need to start the conversation with it's about value, and people are achieving that. But happy to, Charmaine, happy to sit down and go through that in a bit more context to where you're at in your journey.
Great, thanks, Rob. Question here: you mentioned earlier that that modern day ERPs have effectively a collective learning that has been established over many businesses, thousands of businesses, I think you said. So the question is, does that apply across all industries, and therefore, is someone implementing an ERP, should they expect that most of the processes that they may be considering implementing, regardless of whether or not there's some tweaks to it, can be achieved through a modern day? I think the question here is with NetSuite.
Yeah, so the answer is yes. Are there industries that we're not as well suited to? We say NetSuite, yes, and there's other ERP solutions around that, but generally the core, and looking at the list of people that are attending, which I did do a bit of a run through earlier, everybody on this list should expect that the ERP is going to come with some standard stuff that works in there. Now, if we then get into, for example, we've got some retail franchise people, for want of a word, on the session, looking at what works best with franchises. There might be the tweaking that you were talking about of having solutions and processes work there, because that obviously at the franchise level, depending whether it's store owned or not, there are activities that are not the same as the head franchise, or if I get that right in my memory, as such. So I think you should come to the conversation with an expectation that those baked-in processes are ready to go, and then we find the couple that aren't there if they exist as such, and they're generally about tweaking. So an area, as an example, would be if you're if you're selling wheat or something like that to beer industries, whatever it may be, the concept of having a single order for the contract of, say, 100 tonnes is standard. Not all systems then have that drawdown order concept in there. So we do. So we can handle those sort of order patterns. So you may order 30 times, but on that overall order. So there are some ERPs that do certain things better than not. But again, we can look through that stuff and make sure the right ones there. There's no perfect ERP, though. I would also add that. I can never guarantee you that 100% of what you do is just going to encase nicely in there. But I can tell you that, again, I taught the last 5 years, my experience is a lot more of that stuff getting closer to 100% is actually living in the ERP today. And it's becoming a standard. Or if it's something like, say, EDI, which there are partners that play in that space, it's incredibly connected. It's written in the same code and works, so you're not shopping around for something you hope works.